my name is Jamil Janjua, and I'm the CEO of TCS Octara. Octara is a company that belongs to the TCS group of family, and it has established an enviable reputation as being one of the leading executive training service providers in Pakistan. A large part of our success is attributed to our chairman, Mr. Khalid Wan, whose personal commitment to encourage the development of the people at both TCS and at the Pakistan level. It has been very stimulating and very inspiring for us. We take great pride in delivering high quality learning experiences which are based on extensive research of training needs, after which programs are created, working with the best possible trainer, the content developed to address the needs, then marketed as a series of leadership acceleration programs, and finally delivered, ensuring all logistics is taken care of to ensure a high quality learning experience. Our team motto at Octara is to help you succeed. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, I am Aisha and I welcome you all in this 1-hour webinar on corporate communication and your brand on behalf of TCS Octara and TCS Express Dubai. Before I introduce our speaker of the day, Valerie Bram, I would request you to please switch on your cameras and mics while the presentation is given. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and Valerie will answer your questions in the end in the Q&A session. So now I would like to introduce our speaker of the day, Valerie Bram, who is a PhD and specialist in psycholinguistics. She is the managing director and founder of T2 Linguistics UK. She has 30 years of experience in worldwide consultancy. She has worked with a wide range of organizations, both private and public, in a cross-section industries. And her work experience spans over America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and UK. So thank you, Valerie, for coming on board, and I welcome you all, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Aisha. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's about 10 o'clock in the UK. It's raining, which is very normal, and we hope that we can share our experience with you and your participants. I'm very fortunate to have with me this morning Dr. Henry Fabian, who is former board director of Standard Chartered Bank, responsible for HR worldwide, and for the last 20 years has been an international consultant. He's a registered clinical psychologist, and the work that we've been doing with large companies, a lot of it is psychological. So he's going to input quite a lot of psychological know-how as we go along. So my background, very briefly, is in communication entirely. That my first and second degrees are in that. And Henry's is in psychology and in clinical psychology, as well as hugely in corporate life. So we think that possibly by giving you our experience of the US, UAE and the UK, we'll cover a lot of the things that are happening generally in the world. So let's move on to where we've worked. As you can see, we have worked all over. We're hoping to get to Australia this year, and we did work in Tashkent for a while, so it's as close as we could get to Pakistan, and we did a huge amount of work in Dubai. So it's interesting to see that the global trends are much the same in terms of human communication, and I hope that by giving you 3 case studies, that in fact that you'll see that human behavior is driven by the same needs, same evolutionary needs.
So where are we going? In this presentation, it's going to be rather general rather than specific, because as we're dealing with lots of countries and lots of organizations, it's very difficult to try and make it related to a specific product or specific company. So in the time which you're allowed, we're going to give you examples of brands, their mission statements, their visions, and their values. The second thing we're going to concentrate on is establishing the gaps in the delivery of your brand, and making sure that you have a depth understanding of how you're going to introduce it and what you're going to say. Finally, in any organization, you always have obstacles. And there are both people who want things, want to change, people who don't want to change. So identifying the obstacles to your goals is crucial in launching an introduction. And finally, we'll try and give the brand, the organization, a living spirit, a soul and a heart. Because a lot of people think it's all quantitative, but it really isn't. It's heart and soul.
Okay, so those are the four main areas, and Aisha is kindly offered to field the questions as they come up, and we'll do our best to answer your questions as we go along. So let's start with what exactly is a brand. This has gained huge global interest over the last 10 years. It used to be the province of PR and marketing, but now everyone is talking about brand.
There are many strategies. And obviously in the time allowed, we can't cover all the strategies. But one which hit me in the eye and seems very practical and useful is one developed by the Forbes magazine. Obviously they had some academic input into this as well. So the important thing about a brand is the personality, the characteristics and attributes you want to include. What are the benefits? In other words, you must have some sort of performance benefit or profit benefit. It can't just be introduced for fun. What position it's going to take in the organization? Does it have long-term value for the organization? And can we produce a vision which can be reinforced and revitalized and sustained all the time?
And the problem that you've got with corporate communication is somehow or other you've got to communicate all of that either to your customers and clients and or to your staff and your stakeholders. So it's a complicated set of criteria.
And the main criteria to consider before you introduce the brand design are these 7. I think they're very important, very important. The first one, it should be simple and sparse. Because often the problem you have is you have marketing want these attributes, compliance want these attributes, IT want these attributes. My advice to you is to stick to a core requirement plus about 6 to 8 attributes or qualities. Don't try and do 15 or 20. It's going to be a real failure. The next question you must often ask yourself is it doable? In other words, do you have the facilities? Do you have the technology? Do you have the staff to be able to introduce it and commit them to this particular style of brand? Now, this is one of the most key ones. Everybody has got to own it, from the chief executive to the directors, to the staff, and to all the people who work in the organization. Recently, I was involved in a assignment, a project, and we planned that everybody on the first day should wear a t-shirt. And lo and behold, some of the directors and the chief executive didn't wear a t-shirt for that day. So you can imagine the reaction of the staff, that they didn't really feel that the top people owned it. The next thing is it has to be aligned with what you want to achieve. In other words, do you want to achieve profit? Do you want to achieve performance? Do you want to achieve corporate responsibility? It's important that your alignment is in keeping with the brand you introduce. The next problem you have is actionable. In other words, can it actually be done? Can it be done? Is it realistic? Is it practical? Is there a budget? Do you have the necessary support? All these are very important. And number 6, you go on to correlate it. It's got to be correlated what were the aims and the goals and the vision and the mission of the organization. If it's not correlated with that, you're wasting your time. And finally, do you have the departments, the executives, where you can drill it into the system and make sure that it works and that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet and everybody's on board?
So let's have a look at what's been going on with human beings across the world. These are from Forbes. These are the top brands with what their value is down the side here. If we have a look at these top 10 brands, you can see that we've got Coca-Cola and McDonald's, which is food and drink. So as human beings, we're interested in those two. We're quite interested in being entertained. So we don't have players, we don't have the fools, we don't have any of the other things that used to entertain us. No, we've got Disney. And the rest of them are tech companies. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that there was a time when my father didn't have a telephone in the house, and when mobile phones came, everybody said you only need them so that if you break down on a dark night, you can call for help. There's been such a change in the use of technology. We've all got a computer, an iPad, we've got a mobile phone, you name it, we've got it. Some of us have got computers on our wrists. It speaks of the need of human beings to be constantly communicated and connected with each other, to retrieve and send information. That's what we want, and that's where we put our money, and that's why these companies have become so important. So if we need to communicate with each other, and in fact we do it all the time, you couldn't be surprised if we've got pretty much very good at doing it. We can manage several different technologies all at the same time. We can manage them from an early age. I mean, I was in Detroit airport. I saw a small child, 2 years old, still in napkins, with an iPad, happily playing a computer game. Apparently the optimum age for tech savviness now is 14. So those of us who are older than that, we missed the boat there. So what I'm trying to point out with this list is that mastering technology has enabled us to stay in touch. And you know, the latest development has been the little buds that you can walk around within your ears. So instead of, as I used to think, gosh, that person's talking to themselves, there must be something slightly wrong with them, I now know that everybody's walking around who can afford it with buds in their ears, and they're in connection with somebody all the time. So our ability to communicate has become highly sophisticated, extremely fast, and most of us can do it quite well. Well, we don't all do it well all the time, but most of us do it quite well. And we expect companies that we deal with to be equally good at doing it. And I'll show you in a minute why there's a gap in delivering the brand, why that's happened. If that's the case, we should all be doing brilliantly. So
Actually, I'm a little disappointed. I see Louis Vuitton there, and I know Valerie's got a couple of bags, Louis Vuitton bags. She missed out on one of the key brands which she loves.
Yeah, they don't have a mission, and they don't have mission statement, and they don't have a value system. They just sell the product. It's the only brand on that list that doesn't do that. The problem that you've got is raising expectations. So in the screen that I'm showing you here, the missions are huge, absolutely enormous. So you've got British Gas, which is the biggest utility in the UK, which promises to look after your whole world. Then you've got Amazon. We aim to be the Earth's most customer-centric company, and so on down the list. Now, these are so enormous, and we all love them to death, and we want to experience them, but obviously companies can't do that all the time. And so here is where the thing becomes a little bit difficult. Although the companies have invested in hardware and software, so they've got the means and the mechanisms of communicating, they don't always actually deliver what they seem to have promised the rest of us. And that's where trust slips and we become very disenchanted. So let's have a look at the main, this is 2019, 2020. These are the different methods of communication most of our clients use these days. And this is the, let me just move this. This is the usage of them. So you can see that chatbots is now 44%, Facebook 42%, WhatsApp 34%. It's all technologically biased. And it's affected the way companies communicate. So in the old days, basically relied on letters. Some had outlets, so they saw face-to-face their customers and their clients. And if the organization was small, everybody talked to each other. Those days are long gone. So these are the areas which are now primarily how companies communicate. And one of the problems that I'll talk to you about in a moment is that the old style of communication hasn't necessarily moved fast enough to accommodate the new methodology, the new channels. And so you've got an old style of communication that you're trying to use in a very modern, up-to-date style of, or modern, up-to-date connection, and it doesn't work. So these are the three brands that we've chosen, one in the UAE, one in the UK, and one in the USA. So having established that we're all pretty damn good at communication and that companies are trying really hard to use all the new platforms, why is it that they're not very successful? So we've taken a bank in the UAE, a utility company, and we've taken a British government organisation. So basically, when you're managing your brand, this is where it's very difficult to measure. Managing the brand is all about the perceived value to the customer, the perceived value, and that's basically what I, the customer, decides the value is to me. It's a very subjective, terribly subjective thing, and it's very, very difficult to measure because people react differently. So here's brand number one. The vision, mission, values, and purpose are down the side. Now, if you're communicating this brand to be globally recognized, probably that's not one for the whole organization. That's probably the chief exec and the leadership team. However, the second one, is about the day-to-day application of the brand. Every day, they want to make customers' lives simpler by providing solutions that will help them fulfill their financial aspirations. It's pretty a big mission. And then you've got the values, and then you've got the purpose to make banking better. So now let's assume we want this to go through the entire organization. The purpose is to make banking better. Let's leave aside for a moment whether the staff are empowered to do that, whether marketing has communicated with the rest of the bank that this is their goal. How would you drive this through corporate communication? Somehow or other, you've got to get that to make banking better into all your corporate literature, your emails, your SMS text messages, and everything that you do. And the problem is that people just simply don't know how to do it. Marketing can do it, but probably not many other people in the organization can do it. So the brand characteristics for this bank were designed by a branding company, and this is what the leadership team agreed to. In the center here, that's the core of the organization. That's what drives its behavior, its policies, procedures, etc. It's going to be innovative and forward thinking, cutting edge. And then around the outside of the circle, you can see the characteristics, the persona of the bank. So that's what it was supposed to be. At this point, we were called in, and I must say that companies that call us in generally are the good companies, and they're looking for incremental improvements. We tend to find it's not the poor companies that call us in. So we were called into the bank, and we reviewed a huge amount of bank communication, written, spoken, through all the different channels. And we came up with an analysis of what the bank actually looked like. So bear in mind now, this is forward thinking and innovative, thoughtful, conscientious, etc. actually the bank came through as parental and authoritarian. Negative, threatening, judgmental, controlling, traditional, and indifferent. I was like miles away from what it needed to be. If we go back to the original, what its personality was, this is what the voice of that type of organization should have been. The innovative organization should have been grounded in plain speaking, using modern phraseology, jargon-free, simple, friendly, down to earth. This is what it actually came across as, having out-of-date language, being verbose, being padded with corporate jargon, full of legal speak, cold and very formal. So there was a massive, massive gap. Here I thought I'd give you an example of a piece of communication. For example, it says, in accordance with the provisions stated in clauses 11.7 and 11.10 of the Home Loan Agreement signed between you and the bank dated X, and the applicable laws of the UAE, we request you to respond within 14 days from the date of this letter, stating your preference of payment, failing which the bank will proceed to add the uncharged principal amount to the outstanding loan. So I really don't think that was anything close to what the bank wanted to be, look like and sound like. So we then took a whole, I think 28 different pieces of bank communication, and we measured them against all of these characteristics of personality and voice. And across the top, you can see here, that's the target. They were aiming for 100%. Well, they were scoring for the bank script, which is the spoken word. They scored just over 25 for innovative, and that was their core value. Customer focused was lower. Thoughtful wasn't very good. Conscientious was quite good. But down here, empathetic, which was one of their core values, was low, very low, barely made 10. Non-corporate, jargon, and friendly wasn't very good, and the quality wasn't, informal wasn't very good. So you can see what we've done here. We've taken the personality and the tone of voice, and we've measured how they're coming across in scripts. We then did the same for complaints, then innovative is even less here. We did the same for SMS text messages. So this is where modern communication styles are really, really important. Modern, as you can see, came low, as did empathetic and non-corporate. And so sorry, let me go back there. So what we were able to do is to present the leadership team with, this is what you wanted to sound like, this is how you wanted to come across as an organization. This was the persona that you had designed for you, and this is actually where you're starting from here. And then after that, you can actually make a plan as to how to close that gap. So that was the UAE, and I don't want you to think that the UAE is unique in having a brand gap. The whole world has a gap in closing the brand. Let's take a UK government agency. This is a monopoly. We haven't a choice to go anywhere else. We're stuck with this government agencies. It's called the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency. So anybody who's driving a car, a van, a bus, a lorry has to deal with this government agency. The interesting thing about this particular project was that they brought in somebody who was going to digitize the entire agency, transport it into the 21st century, and make it far more technologically savvy than it was. And in doing so, they didn't have a brand. Government agencies are not as quick as commercial ones. They haven't really got the PR and the advertising sorted out. So they asked us to design a brand, which we did in conjunction with the leadership. And what we did was we measured the characteristics they wanted as it came across in written and spoken communication. So being a government agency, they clearly wanted to be trustworthy, and they weren't at all trustworthy. They were extreme and untrustworthy. They were traditional, extremely uncaring, unfriendly, immensely indifferent, couldn't give a toss about anybody really, insincere and impersonal. That's where they started. So we agreed a project with them, launched it. We had the support from the top, and at the end of the project, this is what happened here. You can see that they did extremely well on caring and friendly. They also did quite well on empathy. They certainly moved 3/4 of the way on trustworthy. Sincerity is a very difficult concept to communicate, and that's a hard one to nail. But they definitely improved and closed the brand gap. But it was a very big push, and it was a push from the top right through the organization. But it is very doable. They won several awards as a result of that, which is quite unusual for UK government agencies and departments. So that was easy to, and that's how we measured that one. And I'll give you the third one, which was a USA company. Now, a lot of companies are measuring NPS scores, as you probably know. And they had a virtual customer service center scattered around the area. They started off with an NPS of 47 as a whole, and in 3 months it had gone up to 61, and 60 is world class. So I can't say that we did that on our own. We didn't. What we did there was to release the latent talent within the workforce by getting permission for them to use the inherent skills that they would have had and used in their private lives in the commercial world, because organizations tend to stifle people, but we'll come to so those are the 3 different ways we've measured brand gaps in 3 different organizations, and I think that speaks for itself. This one is unique. We've had permission from this company to actually reveal a lot of commercial data and financial data. This was a UK company that has worked across England, Wales, Scotland, where the personalities and the behavioural patterns are quite different, the cultural patterns are different, and as you know, Scotland and Wales have broken away as much as they can from the UK government, and they want their own personalities, they want their own cultures, and they want ability to control themselves. So they had different attitudes to Centrica, which was the parent company. However, across all 3 of them, when we started, they were minus 33 as an NPS. We joined them at minus 20. We stopped measuring at 43, but apparently they went up to 65, which is an absolutely astronomical improvement. But the entire organization was behind it. The chief exec was behind it. The directors sponsored all the road shows and briefed everybody. So everybody knew where the organization was going, and all the staff were behind it and got rewarded and recognized for the work they were doing. I think this is interesting. People don't appreciate how powerful communication is in improving the image of the organization and the perceived value to the customer, because don't forget that was one of the aspects of brand. So an average increase in NPS of 7% correlates with an average 1% growth in revenue. And if we could just get the chief execs to realize that communication equals money, then they might pay a bit more attention and they might put a bit more into the projects, but they tend to think it's the product and the process that where the money is, and it's no longer just there. So, all right, so those are the brands, 3 different continents, 3 different organizations, and all had massive gaps in the delivery of the brand. So why was that the case? What were the obstacles?
Right. Now, in any organization, you have staff who've been there 30 years, 20 years, 15 years. You have young staff who come in with new ideas, new methods of doing things, making suggestions, making recommendations, which are not often heard. In fact, British Steel, one of the major steel producers in Wales, had this problem where they had some outstanding, really outstanding junior staff. And whatever they introduced, they eliminated in a day because they felt they wanted the traditional methods to apply. So the first issue you have with obstacle number 1 is the distribution and communication of the brand. Frequently, the organization spends a lot of money, really a lot of money on introducing a new brand and trying to change the communication styles. Guess what? We often find it in a bottom drawer and nobody's even heard about it. In other words, the staff and the team leaders and the people down below have never heard about the work that has been done in these projects by outside consultants and internal marketing and sales departments. The second thing, which is really key, is the lack of knowledge how we implement a brand. In other words, the tendency often is to use traditional methods that have perhaps worked in the past. It's quite true, they might have worked in the past. But as Valerie highlighted to you, things have changed, and you have to communicate knowledge and implement a brand in a different way. In fact, a much more closer interpersonal method has to be used, and briefing has to be done. And often you have to sometimes reward and incentivize the learning of the knowledge to make sure that it's done extremely well. Then, of course, you have blockages to change. And blockages to change are usually associated with no visible support from the top. In other words, it's a kind of a statement made by the top executive and you never hear from him again. But as you know, Tom Peters, the famous consultant, has indicated that you really, even if you're going to introduce something, you've got to constantly be in touch with your staff. You constantly do a walkabout, give them the feeling that you also really want to change and you're committed to the change. Then, of course, you have always the legal problem, the fear of liability. And compliance these days plays a very important role. And I don't say that it's unimportant, but you now have the situation where compliance is sometimes dictating what should be done. And there are occasions where companies have to take a little bit of a risk, perhaps not a high risk, but it is necessary for them to introduce things knowing that there might be some liabilities along the line. Another area which is often in conflict is quality control. Quality control are very rigid and have set certain qualifications and certain characteristics in the job. In fact, we were associated with one company that if you didn't stick to the quality control, it was a reason for dismissal. So you can see the fear that is created amongst your staff if they don't abide by what is in the quality control form. The third thing is, of course, is fear and resentment by employees themselves. In other words, change often causes problems. We did a lot of work in Eastern Europe, and in Eastern Europe, the people were particularly afraid because often their jobs depended on the particular style that they were used to. So when we tried to introduce new ways of doing things, we had this fear and resentment, and actually it hit back at the consultants and they became the scapegoats. Valerie will deal with the myths about communication.
Yeah, the 5 major blockages are absolutely enormous, and unless you've got support from the top, it's very, very hard to navigate them. Henry's gone through these here, but this conflict with quality control is an absolutely major blockage, and it gets to be very silly because we're still talking about corporate communication. And using that, and I'll show you how you can do that in a moment, you can use that to drive the brands through your organization. And if you get somebody who's in quality control and you've advocated a change in communication style that they personally don't like, you can get a silly situation that I was faced with recently with a computer tech company that was outsourcing 29 different bank series of letters. And for some reason, the quality control manager decided she didn't like the word that. So any of the staff that used the word that were failed. It was a fail as a piece of communication. And I said, well, why have you outlawed that? And nobody knew why. I think that kind of nonsense is, it shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion. As a communicator, may I drop this in here? As a communicator, when you're assessing a piece of communication, you ask only 3 questions. you ask one, what was the aim of this piece of communication, whether it's, you know, controlling a meeting, running a webinar, sending an email or an SMS text message. What's the aim when you're doing it? Secondly, what's the best method of doing it? What's the best channel to use? Who's the customer? Does it suit the customer? And then thirdly, the third question is, and was it successful? That's all you need to know. What was the aim? How did you choose to do it? And were you successful? The problem that you've got with communication is that people only focus on the content of the message. And oftentimes, let's take something very simple. Let's take a letter of complaint or a text message of complaints. And you know that if customers are unhappy, they use Facebook or Twitter or something, and it costs an absolute arm and a leg to the business if you don't sort it out. So let's say you've got you're dealing with a complaint. It's not just the answer as to why the customer's complaining that you've got to deal with. If that complaint gets out there, it's going to damage the reputation of the company. It's going to reduce the trust. You might lose the business. There's a whole pile of things. So when you're dealing with it, you have to recover your image and reputation. You have to restore the trust, as well as give detailed content information. So when you're looking at what the aim was, it's not just the aim was to explain or inform. There's a whole pile of other very important, powerful, emotional things that you need to do as well.
Let me give you a very vivid example of that. Recently, a utility made a major error in that they overpaid me a refund. So the next step for that company was to send me a nasty letter to say that they were going to report me to the credit agency for not refunding that money. But I explained to them, I didn't make the error, you made the error. So why didn't you do? And although I'm of a reasonably mature age, I've never ever had a letter which revolves around the underpayment of an account. So it wasn't the money that was important, it was the emotional trauma which it caused me.
Okay, so let's move on to the myths about communication, since we are actually talking about driving your brand through your organization. All right, these are what you're going to come up against, which are specifically related to communication. Number one is a really big thing, that there will be a traditional way of doing things already. They will have been deeply embedded in the organization. They'll be told to people on induction courses. There'll be people that will be championing them, will be guarding them, and do not want any change, because I don't know if you know, but evolutionary psychologists said that we have a bias towards status quo as a species. We don't really want to change if we can possibly avoid it. So that's an absolutely massive thing that you're going to have to deal with. And you really do need, as I showed you in the beginning, those brands that we all love, they're all technology driven. And they have affected the way we communicate. So you cannot allow old traditional types of communication to stop the organization moving forward in all sorts of ways, including modernizing language. I don't know if you know, but there are, at the last count, and if you're speaking, you're using English as your main form of communication, Google and Harvard counted about 1,500,000 words in the English language. And when we've done some research, we found that people in call centers use roughly a vocabulary of about 927 words, which limits really how sophisticated you can be in how you manage people's perceptions and emotions. So you really need to get somebody to agree that you can change. The second thing, which is a very difficult one, is that even if an organization, and I've seen this many times, produces a tone of voice document and gives examples, you will find people who don't like it. I don't like that type of communication. That's not very professional. I don't like it. I don't really have much sympathy for this. The persona of the organization dictates the voice of the brand. And if you're working for an organization that has a clearly defined persona, it's not up to you to decide the voice of the brand. It's up to you to deliver the voice of the brand. And if you don't like it, you should go work somewhere else. You're paid to represent the organization. So you shouldn't, most people will go with you, but if you have people who personally don't like it, you can either try and persuade them, and if they won't change, you shouldn't allow them to damage a project which is going to transform the way a company communicates. The third thing, which is a real problem here, and I can't talk about the education in Pakistan or in UAE. I'm not sufficiently familiar with it, but I can tell you that education, previous education, can give people very poor command of language. Not all of them, but some of them. And they get stuck with ideas which are incorrect. If I take something really, really silly and tell you that I can't persuade people in corporate writing, especially persuasive marketing corporate writing, to start sentences with and or but, because they say can't start a sentence with and or but. But if you have a sentence focus on the conjunction, you absolutely can start a sentence with and but. And I've given up trying to persuade, because that would take you half an hour to persuade them that that's the case. So depending on the quality of what they were taught previously, they'll either understand language, sentence structure, or how to construct and craft a message, or they won't. So you have to cope with that as you go along. The number 4, destruction of self-confidence. This is a really tricky thing to deal with. Now, because organizations choose and recruit both an experience and what it's going to cost them to run the business, they oftentimes, especially in mass communication areas, they choose people who are either young or inexperienced or will work for small salaries. And then in order to get what they consider to be a consistent standard overall, they impose a straitjacket on these people and say, you will say this, you will read this script, this is how we do it, follow this. If you don't, 3 strikes and you're out. It's a shame that happens. Oftentimes it happens because people are afraid to empower the staff, and the other reason it happens is because they don't invest any money in developing the staff. And so you get people who become very afraid to use their normal talents, their normal communication talents, which I talked to you right at the beginning, are fairly sophisticated. And you get a very rigid corporate style of communication, which will not allow you to deliver the current modern brands, which is to talk efficiently and in using modern style. And then finally, there's the mistaken idea about customer expectations, because they think that customers won't like the new style of communication. So if I write like that or speak like that, or if we say this to customers, clients or stakeholders, we won't be considered professional and so on. So there's a whole bundle of difficulties with changing communication. And the main reason is this. You've got 2 different types of thinking here. You've got rational and emotional. Most companies train knowledge, competence, integrity, reliability, and so on. They train process. So that's what customers, that's what companies do, and that's what customers get. But what customers actually want is the emotional half of this, which is they want empathy, security, they want benevolence, they want goodwill, and they want to feel valued. And that's all emotional. It's got nothing to do with your head. It's got everything to do with your heart. So if the brand doesn't deliver that, then they will go elsewhere. This is the most interesting set of posters I've ever seen. I got these in JFK Airport and I photographed them. You can see it's SAP, and they're talking about how they can feel, how customers feel can make or break your business. how they feel can make or break your business. Turn likes into love. That's highly emotional. And they say, don't guess how people feel about your business. Let them tell you. This is all about emotion, entirely about emotion and not about process. So how do you do this then? How do you change the way you drive your brand through your organization?
Well, when an organization engages us, we go through a very detailed process because it's important to do it well and to do it that it's effective in the organization. Otherwise, it has no benefit. So the first stage is we do a discovery report and make recommendations. This is followed by a design and agree project. In other words, we go to the important key executives, the project team, the CEO, and we agree the project because it's important to get absolute agreement from the top. Then we do engagement. And engagement means you have to brief everybody so that everybody is engaged in introducing the new brand and is happy with it and feels comfortable with it and feels owned in a really positive and effective way. Then you communicate the expectations. What expectations do you want? What do you want the staff to do? What do you want the team leaders to do? What do you want the managers to do? And you've got to communicate it, as Valerie said, simply and effectively so that people understand it completely. This is now supported by training, personal development, and coaching. This is another key part. In other words, it's got to be felt that you can drill it into the organization, that the organization can cope with it, and they feel that not only is it owned, but it's drilled into their mental and mindset situation. Followed up by rewriting some of the written material, rewriting some of the interpersonal material. And a very useful approach is to find champions and in some ways reward them, incentivize them so that they can revitalize and reinforce it constantly. Because in the end, you want success, and you want a success to be sustained. And that doesn't mean for 3 months, it can often be over a period of 3 years.
Okay, one of the things that Henry didn't tell you here, you see in this block here, personal development. Several clients have asked us to design psychological questionnaires, and we've been able to match the performance data they give us with the results of the questionnaires. So we've measured personality traits and behavioral patterns against high-performing individuals, and we've been able to develop a profile of people who are best suited in different parts of the organization, which I think has been quite useful. All right, so this is important for corporate communication, and if you haven't come across this yet, there's lots of books on the subject. This is all based on the latest neuroscience, which tells us how our brains process words and information. Now, apparently, human beings only have 2 positive emotions there, and they have 5 negative emotions, which drive us. They're evolutionary drives: anger, fear, sadness, disgust, and shame. So you've got a 5-to-2 ratio. So when you're trying to make, when you're designing corporate material, you have to take the emotional context of your message into consideration. So you should ask, you know, how is somebody going to feel about this when they read it? How are they going to feel about this when I send them an email? How are they going to feel about this when I speak to them on the telephone? You know, can my SMS text message provoke, which is so very, very short, can that provoke the emotional response I want? So everything's based on emotions. By and large, you have more emotional reactions from people than you do rational. And I think this is something that I keep repeating to myself all the time. Emotional thinking is 5 times stronger than rational thinking. Emotional thinking is 5 times stronger than rational thinking. And that's phenomenal. This piece of neuroscience is something that I think is very powerful. And if I don't tell you anything else, I really want to tell you this today. Doing research with MRI scanning machines, the Friedrich Schiller University, which is mentioned down here, has discovered that words alone can actively trigger the pain center in the brain. So corporate communication should try and avoid those at all costs. So try and avoid words like unfortunately, delay, disappointed, we let you down. Try and avoid all of those because that's not going to be very helpful. So here you are. Words alone are capable of activating our pain matrix. If you're interested in the subject, I suggest that you could have a read of Psycholinguistics, which is a discipline in its own right. There are lots of books on the subject, and it's something that we use every day in our work with big companies. The other thing, the final thing I want to tell you is that you really need, when you're delivering a brand, to give your staff the ability to be sophisticated communicators and to flex the message depending on the customer, the circumstance, the medium, the message. So for example, whilst still underneath the brand, not all messages will be equally formal. They won't all be equally friendly or unfriendly. They won't all be insincere or sincere. You should, as a communicator, be able to do that kind of thing. It is sophisticated. It does take a little bit of practice, but essentially, it's the most successful thing that you can do. Obviously, some communication is verbal. I want you to remember that words alone only count for 7% of the message, and 55% is in paralanguage. And when you're communicating a brand and attitudes and values, here is where it's at. Volume, pace, pitch, and tone. Tone is where attitude sits. So apparently there are 29 different tones that you can use. And staff should be aware that, one tone has got to work for everyone. So I want to play a video now to show what happens when you don't drive your brand through the organization. You put it out there, people believe it, they expect you to be customer focused, and somehow or other you fail. So this is what happens.
United Airlines on my way to Nebraska. The plane departed Halifax, connecting in Chicago's O'Hare. While on the ground, a passenger said from the seat behind me, "My God, they're throwing guitars out there." The band and I exchanged a look, best described as terror at the action on the tarmac, and knowing whose projectiles these would be. So before I left Chicago, I alerted 3 employees who showed complete indifference towards me. United, you broke my Taylor guitar. United, some big hill you are. You broke, you should fix. I should have flown. United breaks guitars.
That cost United 180 million drop in its share price. It's on YouTube. It's a salutary tale for not delivering the brand. Thank you so much for listening to us this morning.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you for giving us such a useful presentation on the subject. Before we move on to the question answer session, I would like to make an announcement regarding our a digital platform which is called the WebMall Plus. It's a platform which is based on WhatsApp group, and there we are promoting live and recorded webinars and blogs and articles and other learning materials. So if you are interested in listening any of the webinar, or you want to become a part of that group, you can sign in to the link which is in your chat box. So
stop share. Could you take, are you going to take the thing off the screen?
Yeah. So Valerie, we are moving on to the question answer session. We have question from Sana. She's saying, in terms of measuring metrics for a successful corporate communication function, what would you suggest are the types of metrics that an organization can use to assess the quality of its communication and the impact of that communication is creating internally as well as externally?
It's a good question about the internal as well as the external. That's the first question usually we are asked by people in organizations. Usually 33% success rate is considered to be good for most organizations. Satisfaction with communications, 33% used to be good. It's no longer good. I think the majority of companies now rely on NPS. I know that Apple relies on NPS, and so does Google, and so on. So NPS would be very good. The problem that you have is in deciding what you're going to measure. And the only thing I can say is that we all know what a good piece of communication looks like. So there is an element of subjectivity in it. I don't think saying somebody's name 3 times actually makes for a good piece of communication. So you've got to be very careful. I think it depends on, does it deliver the brand? Does it sound the tone of voice? Did it achieve its goal? You could come up with a whole list of very broad brushstroke criteria which would serve you well, instead of the detail, nitty-gritty stuff, which doesn't really help very much.
Okay, so I hope your question has answered, Sana. The next question is from Salman. He's saying, please elaborate in inadequate distribution.
I'm sorry, please elaborate.
Inadequate distribution.
Inadequate distribution of what?
Inadequate distribution of the brand.
Yeah, Salman, if you can switch on your camera and mic and ask the question directly. Yeah.
Yes. I want to just know elaboration of inadequate distribution of any product, any brand.
Well, usually it's the brand has been designed or commissioned by Chief Executive Leadership Team. That is best synthesized or condensed into a diagram and given to every single member of staff with an explanation of what it means. What does this mean? How do you communicate friendliness? How do you communicate empathy? How do you sound? I haven't gone into this detail. There are cold words and warm words. If you're going to be a friendly, empathetic organization, you need to use warmer vocabulary as opposed to cold corporate vocabulary. Well, how do you change corporate messages so that it does that? We haven't got into the detail of this. But everybody needs to know how to do it. And one of the things that you discover is that if I were to say to you, I've been a customer, let's assume I've been a customer of yours for 10 years. Could you say something nice to me about that would make me feel good?
I think
they can't do that. So you have to create new phraseology that they can use, because asking them to come up with creative phraseology that will deliver a brand is very difficult for them when all they've done is create process-driven communication, not emotionally driven or interpersonal communication. They don't know what to say to people. And therefore, how are you going to communicate a friendly, empathetic, caring brand if people don't know what to say? They could say, you've been a great customer for 10 years. We really care about giving you good service.
I think the important thing there actually is, depending on the product and the organization, is to
actually, sorry.
A style guide. In other words, produce a style guide with some templates, with some examples. That's one way of doing it. The next way of doing it is to develop what you call quality circles. In other words, get your staff together once a month or once every 3 months and ask them what was successful, what emotional reaction did they get to particular statements or phrases. You'll find your staff actually are very creative. and they will produce a number of phrases and statements which are very valuable for the whole team.
Is that what you were asking?
Salman, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Aisha, can I speak in Urdu?
Yeah, please go on.
मैं बेसिकली ये कंफर्म करना चाह रहा हूँ कि इन एडिक्वेट डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन में जब हमने एक प्रोडक्ट या एक ब्रांड कहीं पे दिया है वो उसके बाद कहीं और जा रहा है. इट मींस के हमने अर्बन एरियाज के लिए किया था तो वो रूरल एरियाज में वो प्रोडक्ट पहुंच चुकी है.
ओके.
तो मैं ये समझना चाह रहा हूँ इसको इनएडिक्वेट वो कह रहे हैं कि डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन उसकी प्रॉपर नहीं कर सके हम, क्योंकि हमने तो एक बड़े शॉपिंग मॉल में, शॉपिंग स्टोर में एक प्रोडक्ट अपनी रख दी, अब वहां से कोई परचेज करके स्मॉल शॉप्स, विलेजेस वगैरह में ले गया, वहां पे उसकी क्या कंडीशन है, क्या हालत है, कैसे लोगों का वर्ड ऑफ माउथ है, उसको इनएडिक्वेट करना चाह रहे हैं, उसको कैसे हैंडल हम करेंगे?
Okay, let me he's asking the question in Urdu. So whatever I've understood, I'll try to rephrase it for you, Valerie. He's saying if the brand or product is for the high tier audience and it is promoted in the in a certain locality, but after the product is launched in the market, it gets purchased in the other market. Like the target audience get the audience which was intended for the product didn't buy the brand or get the brand, but instead some other target audience, some other audience has shown interest in the product. So what's the fault? Where's the fault? Like how can they sort this problem in terms of distributing the brand?
You need to modify it. In other words, if you do some market research and you can get some information. So what he's really saying is been dealing with what we call the upstairs market, which is the top elite market. But now if another audience wants it, then you need to do a little bit of market research. And after doing the market research, you can modify the launch that you previously made.
There are two things that I could add here. It depends if you're global or not. We haven't touched on cultural patterns of communication. There are actually 6 cultural patterns of communication which affect what you say and how you say it across the world. They're very well known. So you could adjust to those. For example, there are some parts of the world that are full of individualistic people who are not interested in anybody but themselves. Other parts of the world, they have a collective instinct where they want to work as a group. So your message might vary. But the thing I would say here, and I had this lecture once from a director of marketing, because I was asking in those days, what is a brand? The brand is everything, and the brand doesn't change. So when I shop for Apple in America, UAE, Uzbekistan, the shops are the same, the products are the same, the lighting is the same, the uniform of the staff is the same, the brand is the brand is the brand. It may flex a bit to suit the audience, but essentially I know it's an Apple shop immediately when I go there. You can't jeopardize your brand. You can't what's the word I want? You can't diminish the brand by altering it all the time. The brand is the brand. The message might be flexed for the audience, but the brand doesn't change. It remains consistent.
Yes, I think that's a very important point. I think McDonald's is a good example of that. In other words, McDonald's used to be for a younger group of people. But now, because conditions have changed, maybe cost has become a factor in going to restaurants and so on. So McDonald's has become more attractive. So your advertising has got to include different audiences. Your product doesn't, your brand doesn't change, but your advertising changes.
Warren Buffett apparently has his breakfast in McDonald's every day. If Warren Buffett can have his breakfast in McDonald's, I'm sure the rest of us can.
Yeah. So I hope, Sulaiman, your question is answered.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the next question, Sana is asking again, can you please also guide me to how can you gauge the impact of communication in an organization so that leadership team is convinced about the importance of its role? We particularly face this problem in Pakistan, where the importance of corporate communication as a function is yet to be defined as a strategic one.
Okay, well, the only thing that's going to convince executives is money. So you can measure different things. You can measure different aspects of communication, and we have done that. For example, one client that we worked with for about 5 years gave us about 5 or 6 different commercial performance metrics that they wanted to change. So we started in one section in the call centers actually, and they said, we want to reduce overhandling time generally across the entire call center. We know that it costs £26,000 per second. Can you please take 10 seconds off so we save that amount of money? So we listened to what they were doing, worked out how we could curtail the calls without damaging the relationship with the caller. And by changing the strategy with which they dealt with people, we took 46 seconds off the overhaul time of the call center, which actually then you could go to the chief exec and say, we've just saved you 1.25 million. That's the only thing that's going to change. You've got to measure it, and you've got to turn that into money. So that's why it's very important to work with either Sigma 6 teams or a communication hub or some statistical team within the organization. And then you can either deliberately measure in little control experiments, or you can deliberately measure on an entire site. But then you feed back the data, because that's the only thing people at the top are interested in.
Because the people at the top are generally accountants, and there are only 2 things they're interested in, is cost and revenue.
Yeah, and after all, that's their job, isn't it? To make the business profitable, to keep it running smoothly. And never has that been more important than in this year of COVID, where companies have gone bust. You know, it's been a very difficult year. So yes.
Yeah.
Also, we're able to convince chief executives sometimes by doing role plays and case studies. In other words, we showed them how a customer was happy with a particular relationship or a better communication. And as Valerie has stressed to you, you know, the emotions playing, sometimes just satisfying the person's emotions. They're not worried about the compensation.
The other thing that we did, which was really quite amusing, although I was very worried about it, we rewrote an apology letter for the managing director of a UK utility. They'd made a dreadful, dreadful mistake, breached data protection, were up for a massive fine for what they'd done, and the chief executive felt the need to write the letter. And as is normal with corporate communication, what he did was give an explanation as to why this had occurred. And after an entire page of A4 writing, he said, so we do apologize. Well, the customer's not interested in that, because the focus is, they're not interested in the explanation. So we redid this. It was a German managing director, and you know what the Germans are like. And I was desperately worried about changing it so it wouldn't suit the personality of the German culture. Anyway, we rewrote this and started, you plan before you start. If he was prepared to say, yes, we apologize, that's for the first thing you should say. So you can't say I apologize, because that carries no emotional punch whatsoever. So we wanted to say, I'm extremely sorry, but we thought, you know, he's chief executive, so we modified, I'm talking to you about flexing the style, we modified that, said you have my unreserved apology for what's happened. And then you don't give the customer a lecture, because the customer already knows what's happened. What's the purpose of that? That's a complete waste of words. So then you say what you're going to do to put it right. So we completely revamped this letter, and he loved it. So after seeing something that he'd written that wasn't very successful and seeing how he could have made it more successful, that was our job done. He wanted the entire organization to change. So you can either do something practical and show it, or you can measure it.
Okay, so I hope his question is answered. Umair is asking, what are the best practices of using social media for corporate communication?
That's a difficult one. It depends again, and we haven't got into demographics. It depends on, you know, what the audience wants and needs. I would say that you should, and the product, yes, you should. I don't think everybody has computers, and that's, if you say, you know, log on to our website, which is what a lot of companies do. We've been seeing customers saying, this is a case of discrimination. I don't have a computer, or I'm not wealthy enough to have a computer. How dare you tell me to log on and do this and that? So you've got to be very careful what medium you choose. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think you've got to keep making decisions at all stages about what medium you use and what the purpose of it is and who you're writing to or communicating with. You're asking for sort of mass communication here, and it's a difficult one to answer. And again, across the world, it's difficult. So I'd need to know a little bit more about what the content of the message was. There isn't a one size fits all is the answer to that. Human beings are so different. Yeah. And cultures are so different. It's impossible to make a prediction.
So the next question is from Zebanasa. She's saying, can the email signature play a good part in terms of expressing the brand or add a value addition for the business?
Our emails, good.
Emails, and there is a signature below your email. So she's asking, does that, it plays a part in creating value? Or
you mean the logos, the prizes, yes, it does. Yes, it absolutely does. Cyber certificates are very valuable now on the bottom of emails. Awards are helpful. I mean, obviously it can't get too busy, but yes, they are very helpful. Keep them. They're good. Yeah. They impress people.
JJ is asking, what is the difference between NLP and psycholinguistic?
NLP is a mathematical algorithm that's been designed by people at the London School of Economics to measure advocacy. You can look it up on the internet. It's a 10 points rating scale. And when you get a survey from a company that says, how would you rate us from 1 to 10, only 9 and 10 count as being positive. All the rest are... Yes, that's what she asked for. Oh, NLP?
NLP
I'm sorry.
Is a philosophy which was developed in the United States.
I'm sorry about that, I misunderstood.
Yeah, and NLP is quite different to NPS. NLP is a kind of a way of behavior, a way of speaking, a way of attitude.
Visual, auditory, or kinesthetic.
Yeah.
Psycholinguistics is all about how the brain processes words and how it affects human emotions, rather than which type of medium I want my information through. Do I want it through my ears, my eyes, or my gut?
Okay.
They're completely different.
Sana is asking again, is it possible to measure ups and downs in productivity due to internal communication? If
Absolutely.
Can you give an example of metrics that may be helpful?
Yeah, staff engagement is the big one. If you don't have an engaged workforce, you can't do anything. You can't drive any brand. They've got to be on your side and they've got to be engaged. So there are computer programs which will measure staff engagement. One of our clients does, in fact, use this all the time. And I think this is originally a teaching background, okay, a long time ago. And I think if you tell people how they're doing and you give them hope, you also give them motivation, and that increases engagement. So if you can measure individual performance metrics, which they do, and then put them out somewhere big, like in an overhead display unit, that increases motivation dramatically. Or you can do corporate communication newsletters or whatever. But yes, it's very important that you tell people that they've done well.
But there's another element to it, is recruitment should give you metrics. For example, there's some companies that get hundreds of people who want to work for them, and there are other companies that get very few people who want to work for them. And one of the things that has developed recently quite powerfully is that people have made themselves into a brand. And if people approach recruitment with a branding approach, in other words, when you recruit people, you look for people with a profile which matches the company's brand, rather than looking for people that don't have the profile necessary. For example, a company who's done this many times is IBM. IBM actually look for a certain individual with a certain profile. They won't recruit other people.
No, one of the things we discovered when we measured performance metrics was that people with high emotional intelligence were very, very good at delivering performance. So if you can measure the emotional intelligence of either your current staff, which is easy to do, or your recruits, that's really helpful. The other thing I think that we found was very important is that they were self-aware. People who are self-aware and are open to feedback will improve, because that's what they want. They want to know how they're doing, and they want to know how they can do better. People who are closed, they don't want to know anything, and you won't get much change out of them.
Thank you, Valerie. Actually, I would like to say that we are 15 minutes above the time. So I'm taking few questions, and if there is any question left, you can ask your question by writing to us, and we'll try to get back to you with the answers. I'm taking the next question, which is from Faizan. What do you think when brands provide franchise in different countries with the same name, but they don't follow the brand guidelines in terms of several factors like customer service and also franchise overprice it?
That's, whoever's running the parent organization really should be in control of that. I mean, if you bought a franchise for a brand and the brand was successful, then you should keep with it. And okay, yes, you do have to adjust for cultural patterns, but you should really keep with it, and somebody should be monitoring that. It's all a question of, how successful the leadership at the top is in monitoring what's going on. You don't sell it and then ignore it, because it damages the overall brand, doesn't it?
The other thing is, I've done a study on different people's values. And the problem is that people in different areas make assumptions about people. And actually they're quite incorrect. For example, the value of power. We did a study on power, and actually everybody wants power. Nobody wants to delegate power. All over the world, whether you're in Uzbekistan, or whether you're in Russia, or whether you're in the United Kingdom, the USA. So it's often the company that makes these assumptions, but in fact, when they research them, they find that they're not that different. In fact, most countries, you'll find that there's a core number of factors, and there's no need really to make a change. The only people who have been a bit guilty of this, to tell you the truth, is the medicine and manufacturers of, for example, the vaccines, which often trying to recover their costs from the original research source. In other words, if it's produced in the United States, then they will charge a little more in the United Kingdom, but the charge extra is actually because they're trying to recover their research costs rather than an intention to penalize that country.
Yes,
it doesn't go down very well.
Yeah, Valerie, I would like you to answer last question very quickly because we're running out of time. The question is from Sabir Hussain. He's saying, what should be your strategy when you, while sitting in top tier, want to inculcate an upgraded service culture among all employees in a short run, but you fail to achieve your objective because of the behavioral status quo which built among them over decades?
Well, you can either assess the staff. Some will change. Some will change if you allow them on their own because they've been in the job for a long time, and if you give them permission, they'll change. There are some that will change if you tell them how to change. So tell them how to change and help them. And there are some that won't change, and basically you need to get rid of them. Those are your only options. So your three options.
Also, the other area, I know where this kind of question comes from. Unfortunately, India has problems of this kind because your trade unions are so powerful in many organizations, and the trade unions tend to be very traditional. So one of the techniques which I've used in the past was to first win over the trade union. And if you win over the trade union, it helps you to introduce it to the staff, then they don't have so much fear of making the change.
Okay,
so more ruthless, and if they're not going to toe the line and they're not going to change, and you're paying them, I mean, you've got an army of people there that could deliver the brand for you. You're paying them. Let them deliver the brand. That's what their job is.
Okay, Saber is saying thanks to thanks to you both. So with that, we comes to end of the question answer session. Now I request JJ to say a few closing remarks.
JJ meaning myself, Jamil Janjua.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I think it was a very useful 1 hour, well, more an hour and 15 minutes of webinar. But I have one last request of Valerie and of Dr. Fabian, is that you have, in some ways been interacting with Octara earlier on through Aisha and perhaps one or two other colleagues, and today also in a much more detailed manner. What is the persona that you get in this short interaction with us with regards to our brand?
I think that the people that we've been talking to have been amazingly helpful, extremely friendly, very professional, and their expertise is perfect. I think it's a wonderful reflection of the brand. I have nothing but praise for them.
Well, I think your statement at the beginning in your video indicated the kind of things you want to do, and it gave me a very positive impression of your organization, in that you didn't stress money or cost or revenue, you actually stressed learning and education. And that's very much in keeping with our style. We often don't stress those too much. We try and say we're a company that wants to develop people, or wants to educate people. People give them something extra and go the extra mile. And we got that impression, I would say.
Thank you very much. We are encouraged by your feedback about us, and we hope to actually look at much greater improvements. The challenge that we have in front of us is this post-COVID situation where having training is not, or delivering training is not as simple or as easy as it was in the past, you see. So we are quite dependent on, trainers like yourselves who can come in and, do a little bit of training online, because that's where the challenge lies, That way, it makes it easy for us also to engage trainers outside our country and in UAE. So we will look forward to hearing feedback from the participants that have been online, and I was very impressed that the number of participants went up to 45 to 46 and stayed at that number throughout the 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is an indication of how engaged they were with your presentation. So let's wait to hear from them, feedback from them, and perhaps then Aisha could get back to you on something that we can do on a much more longer basis than this 1 hour webinar. So really, thanks a lot. There was a lot of learnings for me also. The one that really appealed to me was the fact that branding is not a marketing function, you see, as is assumed, from everybody else. It's a function of everyone, and it starts from the top. The responsibility of branding an organization or the custodian should be the CEO and the senior people. So that came out very, very strongly. And of course, it has to be, cascaded all the way down to each employee at the lowest rung. Exactly. So thank you very much. It was interesting to hear the major obstacles. I mean, there are genuine obstacles that we are also facing from time to time. And, I think there's a lot of learning for us as Octara. But I would like to thank you again, both you, Henry and Valerie. And thanks to the participants who have been engaged with us and took time off to listen to this interesting and enlightening subject on branding. Branding is becoming very important even for countries, as we already spoken earlier on. Branding, UAE is always in the process of branding itself,
Yes.
So they've branded themselves very well in the areas of tourism, in the areas of, of coming across and getting a different experience. And mind you, we've experienced that they've really moved forward and made themselves very smart. And all the technology that is available in the West, I think it is just in theory. Over here is being practiced on a day-to-day basis, especially in customer services. So they've done very well that way. And I would encourage you to come and have I don't know whether you've been here before, but I would encourage you to come to Dubai and see for yourself. Yeah?
We love Dubai. Apart from the heat.
Well, these are good days. I mean, from starting from November up till March. I mean, temperatures right now, it's something like 26, 27, and gets to be 17.
And great facilities.
We planned to come for the expo, but that's been delayed, hasn't it?
Yeah. That's going to be, I think, in October next year.
Yeah, before we end the session, there's a quick question from Shoaib. He's asking, what is the difference between brand and marketing? Can we say brand is a marketing?
No, brand is brand is everything. Brand is everything. Marketing is just how it's used.
I hope Shoaib, your question is answered, because he's written this question twice. So with that, we come to the end of the session. Thank you everyone for coming in and joining in and staying there for 1.5 hours. And we hope to see you soon. And thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Valerie, for your time.
Thank you very much again. You want to take a picture of everybody?
Yeah, sure.
So what do? We need to come on the screen or something?
Yeah, I request all the participants to switch on their cameras and thumbs up maybe.
Actually, we should have done that much earlier.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Sarim, of Octara, and all participants.
Okay. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.